We just had a major hurricane, Helene, that hit in the Big Bend of Florida, but I think a lot of people, particularly on the west coast of Florida and the Florida Peninsula, saw major storm surge, major damage to a lot of businesses and residents that created a lot of debris. And this is something that, of course, local governments have been working on. They have contracts and they do that. But we also understand that this debris creates a hazard if we then get another storm in that same area. So the executive order orders all disaster debris management sites and landfalls in all counties impacted by Helene to remain open and to allow 24-hour debris drop-off. I've also directed state personnel and assets to work around the clock to assist local entities as they continue cleanup and dispose of debris from Hurricane Helene. We also included in the executive order directives to local officials to anybody that is evacuated as a result of Milton, that is, when the storm passes, that they need to be able to get back in their home as soon as possible. If they think that they're not going to be let back on for many days, then fewer people are going to want to follow the evacuation order to begin with. And so, obviously, if there's hazards and people's safety is in major jeopardy, like a bridge is not functioning or something, that's one thing. But the default has got to be get people back into their homes. We are, as I mentioned, at a level 1. We do think Milton will likely become a hurricane either later today or tomorrow. As of this morning, the storm was located 860 miles west-southwest of Tampa. Maximum sustained winds are currently at 60 miles an hour. It's not going to move very far for the next 12 to probably 18 hours. It's going very, very slow, and then it's going to start to pick up the pace and head towards the state of Florida. The Florida Division of Emergency Management is, of course, addressing storm-related resource requests to support communities, potentially in the path of the storm. We've already sent multiple high-water rescue vehicles to Hillsborough and Pinellas County, where current models have the eye of the storm making landfall. Also in Hillsborough, we've deployed nearly 400 feet of flood protection systems for a fire station so that operations are not interrupted due to storm conditions. We're currently coordinating another 1,800 feet of flood protection systems for wastewater facilities, pump stations, and a hospital in both Hillsborough and Manatee counties. And as I previously noted, we've ramped up state support of county debris removal efforts to 24/7 around the clock. Yesterday, I directed Kevin and FDOT to further supplement, not to displace, but to supplement the existing sand and debris removals of our local community. So it's important for all our local communities and local governments to continue with the debris removal. Over the next particularly 48 hours, you have round-the-clock access to these dump sites. We need to work together to clear as much debris as possible. FDOT is helping local entities remove remaining sand from local roads throughout the barrier islands of Pinellas County. And they aim to be complete very soon. The Florida National Guard, the Florida State Guard, additional FDOT personnel, and the Florida Highway Patrol have been activated and deployed to aid in debris removal and to provide logistical support to local entities. Over 800 guardsmen are currently deployed for debris removal. A majority of those are in Pinellas County, and we will soon have up to 4,000 guardsmen for this time-sensitive debris removal mission. It's also important to note, Kevin has the authority. We are opening these sites 24/7. There's some scuttlebutt trying to say the DEP, Florida DEP, is not allowing that. That is not true. Everything is going forward. These things need to be open, and they are going to be utilized. And so we have, and Kevin and his team are coordinating with all the local EM directors to inform them of the waste and landfill sites that have been ordered to remain open 24/7, and we're surging assets to be able to do that. So all available state assets that, and you know, people understand our state agencies have missions, normal missions in the course of normal business. All assets that can help with debris removal are being marshaled to help remove the debris. So if FDOT has dump trucks in Seminole County that can be used to help remove debris in the barrier islands of Manatee, they're going to do that. We are using every resource at our disposal to help our local communities get the debris off. Look, there's been some good work that's been done with this since Helene, and I know a lot of the local communities have taken this serious. And I've seen progress just by going around and visiting, but you also have some areas where there's a lot of debris that's there. So you get hit with a major hurricane, what do you think what's going to happen to that debris? It's going to increase the damage dramatically. And so Kevin and his team have been working on this weekend. We're going 24/7 to be able to do. And if you think about clearly all day today, all day Monday, and then hopefully most of Tuesday or maybe all of Tuesday. I mean, if it hits Wednesday evening, you'll probably start getting some effects, maybe late Tuesday night. We'll see, and this can shift. But this is all hands on deck to get that debris where it needs to be. Final note, we have instructed assets currently assisting in North Carolina and Tennessee to return the necessary equipment and personnel home ahead of Milton's landfall. So State Guard, National Guard, FWC, Highway Patrol, FDLE will be home, manned up, ready to deploy in Florida should those assets be needed to respond to Hurricane Milton. Power restoration was the quickest restoration. I think there were 2.4 million restorations, and it got down to within less than a week. I mean, I think there were a couple thousand accounts in areas where the needed to be rebuilt, but it was a really great effort. The co-ops did a really good job. Duke did a really good job. This potential restoration effort, if we do have an I-4 storm, you are going to see a lot of power outages. I mean, that is just something that I think people should prepare for. We already have a lot of crews coming into the state of Florida. They're going to be staged in different parts of the state of Florida, and they are going to be going as soon as the storm passes. But this is something that potentially would be greater power outages than what we just saw with Hurricane Helene. So Floridians should just be prepared for that. No, if you're anywhere near that cone, certainly you should prepare to have power interruptions. That's just the reality of what we're dealing with. But there is massive amount of resources that are being marshaled, and I think it's Kevin and I's judgment that you're likely to have greater outages for this. Even if it doesn't end up reaching major status, you're still likely going to have greater outages on a Hurricane Milton than we just did with a Category 4 Hurricane Helene. And of course, Milton could end up being a major hurricane as well. So you have time to prepare all day today, all day Monday, probably all day Tuesday, to be able to put your hurricane preparedness plan in place. Make sure your gas tanks are filled. Make sure you have enough water and non-perishable food to last you as long as the power may be out. Clear up loose objects in your yard. Obviously, the big debris piles, you need that to get hauled away, but anything other than that isn't debris, make sure that you have that. Know your evacuation zone. There will be voluntary and mandatory evacuations in effect in a number of communities throughout the state of Florida. If you're on that west coast of Florida and Barrier Islands, just assume that you likely are going to be called upon to evacuate. Now, there's uncertainty about the storm. This is an unusual track in terms of it coming from the Pacific Ocean, hopping across Mexico, forming, and then coming horizontally into the west coast of Florida. Not, I think, any type of storm that has been dealt with, certainly in recent years. When these storms hit, the areas that are on kind of the dirty side of the storm, they're going to get more storm surge. And so if you look at Tampa Bay is very vulnerable to storm surge. I mean, we just saw a storm 100 miles off the coast generate 4 to 6 feet in a lot of places of that. If the Tampa Bay is on the dirty side of the storm, it's likely to generate storm surge in excess of what Helene did. If the storm is further south and Tampa Bay is on the weak side of the storm, it may be that the storm pulls water out of Tampa Bay. So there's a wide range of possibilities that can happen there. But bottom line is you're potentially looking at storm surge that was more significant than what we saw in Hurricane Helene. You do not have to get in the car and drive 500 miles. You're going to be able to have places to evacuate within your own counties. There's also other counties that are already starting to step up and offering sheltering that may not be in the direct path of the storm. And so all that information will be available if you go to floridadisaster.org/shelters, or you can also reach out to your local emergency management officials about that. Now, I don't think shelters have been open yet, but you can anticipate that that will happen in the not too distant future. In Florida, remember, take care of your pets. Every county has at least one pet-friendly shelter. Don't leave your pets behind. If you are using lodging at our hotels when there's a state of emergency, the hotels have agreed to accommodate your pets, and that's very, very important that you do that. We already have sandbag locations open in multiple counties in South and Central Florida. Check your county's EM page to see where those locations are. You can find your county's emergency management page at floridadisaster.org/counties. And remember, calls on evacuation, some of the access to barrier islands, all that, those are all going to be issued by the local emergency management officials. So please keep an eye on this storm. There's a bit, I mean, the greater cone covers almost the entire west coast of Florida at this point. And so, and even if you're not in the cone, as it gets closer, certainly if you're on the dirty side of the storm, there's going to be surge that goes outside the cone that's going to be significant. So just prepare for that and understand that's something that is likely to happen. Apply for assistance. So people that are still suffering from Helene can apply for assistance by going to hopeflorida.com or calling 1-833-GET-HOPE. This is now open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we understand when you have on the heels of a major hurricane to then have another, this is similar to like 2004 when Florida had multiple in a row, that makes it difficult. And if you need help, there's a lot of organizations that have been out there helping these communities, and you can reach them through the Hope Florida line. When you do have power out, I think people really has taken this to heart in recent years on generator use. Great, if you want a generator, use the generator if you lose power, but do not run that generator in your home. That could be fatal. Make sure you're looking at limbs and trees that could fall on your home. If this is a major hurricane and it goes across I-4, it's, I think, would still likely be hurricane force winds by the time it exited the Florida Peninsula into the Atlantic Ocean. So, you could be far away from the west coast of Florida and still have major impacts in terms of the wind and the debris. So just do what you need to do to protect yourself. Have a plan to ensure your electric vehicle is away from your home if your home has the potential to be impacted by storm surge. Salt water making contact with electric vehicles has been known to cause fires, so please take the appropriate precautions to get your EV out of potential storm surge areas. And just know, if you evacuate and you are in one of these low-lying areas that's susceptible to surge, if you have that EV in the garage down there and you get 4, 6, 8 feet of storm surge, your home may handle that well, but if that EV catches on fire, you could lose your home through the fire. These are very difficult fires to put out. So just please take appropriate precautions. Emergency alerts save lives, so please have multiple ways to receive those alerts and act immediately when you do receive them. Stay safe on this. You do have time to prepare. The storm is not going to come today or tomorrow, or likely on Tuesday as well, so we're looking at more the middle of the week. So you have time to do what you need to do, but this could potentially be a major hurricane. No matter what happens, it is going to have impacts to the state of Florida. I don't think there's any scenario where we don't have significant impacts at this point. So please do what you need to do to keep yourself and your family safe. I want to thank Kevin and his team and everyone for you kind of ramp up for a major hurricane. You do response. They did a great job responding. And with the rescues, our local governments and law enforcement and first responders did a great job. Massive mobilization of pods, all these other things have been great. And you go through that, you're kind of running around the clock, and then you got to ramp it back up again. And so I think the morale is good here. And I know in these communities that have already been hit, it's not easy. Not easy to have to go through this again. It's very frustrating when you've worked hard to recover from Helene and you still have so much more to do there, to think that we could get hit by another one. But We'll get through it. We have marshaled all the resources that are available to the state to prepare, including on this unprecedented debris removal mission, including power restoration, search and rescue. Everything is on the table to be able to respond in a robust way. Okay, Kevin?
Good morning. I want to express my thanks to Governor DeSantis for his swift action in declaring a state of emergency well ahead of the hurricane's landfall. He did that more than 96 hours in advance, which allows us to be very effective in our response. I want to just make sure that everybody knows we've been working this scenario. Long-range models have been indicating something for about the last 14 days. So the State Emergency Response Team Planning Section has been working this particular scenario as well as other scenarios for at least 2 weeks now. So that's what's making us very effective in the response. Before hurricane season ever began, our team knew to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, meaning that we were more ready than ever to respond to multiple storms in this season. No stone has been left unturned in preparing for this storm, and our private sector partners have been performing at a high level to address the complex logistical preparedness needs this threat poses. Thanks to their effort, we are working around the clock to get our preparations in place, and I need all of you to now do the same. I urge Floridians to finalize your storm preparations now, enact your plan. I highly encourage you to evacuate. We are preparing, and I have the State Emergency Response Team preparing for the largest evacuation that we have seen, most likely since 2017 Hurricane Irma. But to that end, I want to go back to our basics. Evacuate if you are in an evacuation zone. If you are not in an evacuation zone and your house was built in conjunction with the Florida Building Code, which pretty much throughout the state of Florida means after 2004, you may be better just to stay in place. If you're dependent on power, you will need to evacuate. If you're dependent on a special set of circumstances, you'll need to evacuate. But if you're not one of those individuals and you're inland, not in an evacuation zone, it may be better for you to just stay in place. I know that many Floridians are still trying to recover from Hurricane Helene, and your plans for Milton need to reflect that. Did you go through all your water? Did you go through all your food? Did you go through all your pet food? Do you need to get new batteries? Please make sure you're doing that today. Make sure your entire family knows the plan, including seniors and children. Make sure you have enough supplies in your disaster supply kit to last each member of your family for at least 7 days. Don't forget that the pets need to be included in that plan, and be sure to include supplies for them as you get ready to evacuate. If you or a loved one have access or functional needs issues, please register today with Florida Special Needs Registry at floridadisaster.org/SNR. That's S as in Sierra, N as in November, R as in Romeo, to provide to your local first responders ahead of the potential storm impacts. When you do this, your local county government will ensure that somebody actually comes to your house, picks that person up, and gets them to where they need to go. Now is the time to determine if your home can withstand the hurricane force winds, and if it cannot, as I've already mentioned, you need to evacuate. You can visit floridadisaster.org/KNOW, that's /no, to find out if you live in an evacuation zone. As we talked about 2 weeks ago, flood zones are different than evacuation zones. Please make sure you're paying attention to your evacuation zone, not your flood zone. I want to ensure you that each and every member of the State Emergency Response Team has been working 24 hours a day for the last several days to make sure that we are ready for this particular storm. As the governor has mentioned, we are doing debris removal with every state agency asset that we have, everything from pickup trucks and trailers all the way to dump trucks and grapple hooks. We are getting out there and supplementing the local response to getting that debris out of the way. As the governor has said, DEP has given me the authority to utilize any site for debris management. I can go in there on a minute's notice and take over that site. DEP is not standing in the way of us getting property to use as debris management sites. I have that authority. We have done that, and we will continue to do that. I want to assure everybody that when you get on the evacuation routes and you start evacuating, we have thought through a lot of contingencies. Florida Department of Transportation will have all of its road rangers. We will have emergency fuel along all evacuation routes. We will have emergency EV charging stations along evacuation routes. We are looking at every potential possible location that can potentially house someone as what we refer to in our in emergency management as a refuge of last resort. We have been identifying those locations along evacuation routes now for more than 5 days in anticipation of something major happening. I say all this to tell you the state emergency response team is ready. We are prepared. We've been working every contingency, every scenario. I want you to rest assured that we're here for you and we're ready to respond to your needs. Governor, as always, thank you for everything you do. And as far as everyone out there, please make sure you follow us on X and Instagram at FLCERT, and then on Facebook at FDEM. And you can always go to floridadisaster.org/updates for all of our updates. Again, thank you very much, Governor.
So you have time. You have today. You have tomorrow. Probably Tuesday as well, but certainly Sunday, Monday, you have time to put your plan in place. You have time to make the appropriate precautions. You know, as Kevin said, there are going to be calls for evacuations that will come in areas that are in the eye of this storm that are susceptible to the significant storm surge that we anticipate that this storm will generate. So heed that call. I mean, the one thing that I think people that have been through these storms will tell you is even in a major hurricane, you know, if you're in a structure and you're hunkered down with the wind, you know, you may be able to get through that fine. It is possible. But when you have that surge, there's just it's Mother Nature, and you're not going to win that. And it's incredibly powerful. And we just saw with Helene, there were homes in the Big Bend of Florida, right there on the coast, who had no damage from Idalia, which was just shy of a Category 4 that hit last year. And some of those were totally wiped off. It's because of the surge, because the surge was so much stronger in this storm than it was a year ago with Idalia. And so we just saw a lot of surge, the barrier islands in Manatee, barrier islands in Pinellas, coastal parts of Pasco, and that was significant, but this storm has the potential to generate even more surge than that. So do not mess with that. That's something that's really, really serious. And again, just don't get wedded to where the landfall is being predicted right now. If you are a little bit 30, 40 miles north, that does not mean that the storm can't toggle. If you're further south, it doesn't mean you're not going to get impacts. The cone at this point effectively can bring it almost anywhere on the western Florida peninsula. And yes, most of the models have it somewhere in the center part, but these things can shift. So just know this is going to impact the west coast of the Florida peninsula in terms of the surge, and then it's going to go across the state and likely have hurricane force winds all the way until it exits in the Atlantic Ocean. So if you're somewhere that's inland, the difference between Helene and this is, folks that were inland didn't see as much of an impact in central Florida. I know there were power outages. I'm not saying there was nothing, but you're going to have the storm going right across potentially I-4. Or certainly in the center part of the state somehow, and that is going to cause damage. That's going to generate debris. It's going to cause potential damage to infrastructure. So just be prepared for that and do what you need to do to be able to execute your plan. Okay?
I'm curious about a story that I heard here just a little bit ago that potentially in Pinellas County the landfill had to be essentially cut open so that state crews could get in there and continue dumping debris. Do you know anything about that? Or have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, so that's accurate. So the executive order said 24/7. I know Kevin was in contact with the county folks. There was a bunch of state assets that had a lot of debris to dump off, and it was locked. And there was no one there manning it. And so they basically opened it. And they did the debris. And that's totally appropriate to be able to do that. We need 24/7, right? I mean, this is something I think the local folks have worked hard on the debris. I don't think it's that, it's a lot of debris, right? And so they've worked hard on it, but we've got to redouble the efforts there, and we're supplementing those efforts in ways that have never been done in the history of the state of Florida. And so those debris missions need to be round the clock. You are going to save, you could potentially save lives because this debris can fly and hit people, but certainly you are going to have less damage if you get that debris off. So yes, there was nobody manning that site, and basically our folks in the state just opened it, and they're utilizing it, and everything's going to be open.
What are the challenges of transitioning from one storm to another 2 weeks later?
Well, the challenge is, I think, is just, residents get fatigued by this, right? Because they have to, their lives get upended. Some had damage to their homes. Some lost their homes. We obviously had, loss of life in Florida, and even more in other states. And so that is very a trying time, and that's devastating. And so you get through that, and you're resilient, and I think Floridians have been, but then to see another one kind of on the horizon. As Kevin said, this is something we've kind of been monitoring, but if you go back when this first was being discussed, it was kind of like in the same area where Helene was, and they're like, well, maybe not, maybe rainstorms, we'll see. And then you kind of had this system come across from the Pacific across Mexico, and it's just created this. So we've kind of known that something may happen, but it was like maybe something was supposed to already happen. I think initially they thought it would happen this weekend, right? And so that didn't happen. And so you're like, okay, maybe you're fine. And then you see this form, and then that. So I just think from a emotional perspective, I think it's tough. I think people they do get fatigued, and that's totally understandable. From a preparedness or operational perspective, we've assumed that this was going to happen. I mean, you have to assume that. As soon as we saw there was a potential, we were already figuring out, okay, what do we need to be doing? And we had no idea if it would hit Florida for sure, or what the track would be. Most of these storms that start where Helene, they kind of come underneath Cuba, and then they come up. This one is coming all the way over from Mexico. It's a little bit different than what we've done, but in terms of preparation, we're doing the same, as we would do in any situation. We did have a very robust response. There were rescues that were effectuated, and then within 12 to 24 hours, I mean, those were basically concluded. You see in like North Carolina, that's been an ongoing thing for over a week to be able to go and rescue people out of some of those hard-hit areas. So our folks did their duty on that. They'll be staged, ready to go on this. The power crews, we're marshaling that. We're going to be talking. I know Kevin's already talked with a lot of the companies, but the Helene power restoration was textbook. I mean, that was very quick. I mean, I have 2.4 million restored, and I think you got to basically to where 20,000 were out within like a few days of this. And some of those harder hit areas have to be rebuilt, and so they're even doing that a lot faster than normal. So that's great, but now we're looking at potentially more outages. You're looking at you look at the central part of the state, I mean, there are a lot of people there, and this storm can potentially do a lot of damage. So anything from preparation, we're just plowing through. But I do think the challenge is just, this is a taxing thing to have to go through. And I remember back in 2004, it was just like one thing after another, and it was just, and people got really fatigued by it. Now, there were people that were out without a power for a long time there. Helene, fortunately, the power was restored very quickly. I don't think it's ever been restored that quickly after a Category 4+ storm. But I think we're looking at this and saying, okay, more debris perhaps, more storm surge perhaps. Certainly more storm surge in areas that just got the surge but were far off from the eye of the storm on the Florida Peninsula. And then, what type of damage are we going to see with infrastructure? I mean, we did have the SR 786, Bradenton Beach, Anna Maria, Longboat Key. That road got damaged. There was a lot of sand, so we did an emergency repair on that, and we're happy to do that. Obviously, we want to get that up and running. But we didn't have as much really major structural damage on our roadways or our bridges as we could have. This could potentially bring more. So, it's a serious matter. But I think people are taking it seriously. I think when you go through and see that you could have storm surge like we saw in Horseshoe Beach and some of those, all the way down hundreds of miles south, you still had significant storm surge. People realize they don't want to mess with that.
Does there need to be a supplemental aid package from Congress?
What's that?
Does there need to be a supplemental aid package for FEMA from Congress before the election?
That would be a question for the congressman. What I said the other day was we submitted requests to basically just utilize the existing federal programs that Americans, have a right to access, and we got approval for what we asked for. How they finance that, I think, is up to them. I know there's a lot of controversy about how the agencies use money, but for our perspective, I mean, we will obviously be submitting a pre-landfall request. If the storm is anything like it's being forecast, of course, we'll likely get approved for things on the back end.
Has the Safeguard and National Guard been recalled from the ports?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that obviously was a mission that was important, and it was a mission we would have discharged. But once they said that they weren't going to do any more work stoppages, we didn't need to have the State Guard there. But we will be ready with a plan in January if there's an interruption, because before we're even dealing with Milton, Helene, you're not going to have all the repairs done just in a few months. I mean, these things take time, and there's going to be a need for supplies. There's going to be a need for things. Now you throw another major storm on, and look, we'll hope for the best, but we got to be prepared for major impacts. There is no way that you can just have ships sitting off the coast of Florida or South Carolina or Georgia or any of these places with things that people desperately need and just have it idle there. So yes, if we need to, we will do what we need to do to ensure that. And we were, there was, I know, at least one ship that was potentially going to come to one of our ports to try to make sure that we kept things going. And I think you likely would have seen other states follow our lead, and you would have seen that. But fortunately, that stopped, and so the ports are open, and so we don't have a need to have those folks there now.
Do you know, and this might be a direct question, about debris removal crews? The state amasses a bunch of contracts before storm season. We usually have the most because Florida knows how to deal with them. But we've had other disasters in other states that those crews could go elsewhere. Are we facing challenges in that area, or?
Sir, there have been some challenges, and I don't know that you were at the Anna Maria Island conference that we did. I did advise debris haulers, if they don't show up in Florida and fulfill the contracts that we have in place, that I will direct the Secretary of the Department of Management Services to place them on the suspended vendor list from doing business with the state of Florida. We have these contingency contracts. I think that's one of the things that you can see we do very well, as you mentioned in your question. But we do have vendors that will, especially subcontractors, that will chase the money, and they may leave. However, under the governor's leadership last night at 9 o'clock, when we decided that we were going to come in and truly supplement, we went to some of our same debris vendors and said, hey, we're looking for any dump truck that we possibly can do. And in 2 hours, our vendors came up with 150 dump trucks and had them on site this morning at Tropicana Field at 7 a.m. ready to go to work. So we're not having any issues finding people to do the work. We're very appreciative of our private sector partners for showing up and putting in the time and effort here in Florida, so we're good.
About how much debris needs to be cleaned up here, and how much can be done by Wednesday?
I mean, look, the storm produced a lot of debris. Now, they've been working on this since the storm hit. Kevin, that was one of the main things Kevin was telling the local communities. Have your debris contracts in place and get after it. Not necessarily, I mean, obviously we knew we were still in hurricane season, but it just helps with the recovery. I mean, when people see the debris hauled away, it helps the communities bounce back when the debris sits there for a long time. And there's some times where you have the local governments, they don't want to pay for it, even though they'll get reimbursed and this and that. So Kevin really worked with them to do that. So there has been progress made, and I think they all took it seriously. But if you look in some of these areas, I mean, we were just in Anna Maria Island, and you go down the road, and there's a lot of debris piled up. Now, you talk about having hundreds of additional pickup trucks, dump trucks, all this, that's going to make a big, big difference. And they're working around the clock. So, I know that if you look at the priorities on this are clearly the Pinellas Barrier Islands, the Manatee Barrier Islands, probably coastal Pasco, I think, where we were at the other day, probably some sites in Hillsborough, kind of along there. So with the resources that we're marshaling, that is going to make a difference. And I know that everyone, I think, is on the same page at the local level, and certainly we are on the state level, that we have all these other things we got to prepare for. We're sending the word out to the residents that that this is something you got to be preparing for now and take the steps you need to. And we got to do all that like we would for any other hurricane, but we do have to do this debris mission. So our supplement, I think, is more than has ever been done by far, but it's important. And these sites are open 24 hours. And as you asked, if they're not open, we're going to open them, and we're going to do that. And basically, Kevin will effectively commandeer that under the emergency authority just to be able to make sure we have a place to put this stuff. So I think it's really, really an important mission. I'm glad that Kevin has spearheaded it, but I don't think we've ever had. I mean, we've got DOT, FWC. I mean, we have all these agencies that have different assets, and they're doing things in the normal course with those assets. It's not like they're just sitting around. So we're pulling them off other tasks to be able to focus on this until this storm makes landfall. And look, we don't know the exact track because I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. That's why the cone ultimately covers the whole western part of Florida, the peninsula. But if it hits in the same spot, if it hits in one of the spots that already had a lot of debris, and the nasty side of the storm does that, I mean, you're going to see surge. You're going to potentially see much more significant winds. I mean, we didn't have as much wind damage on the Florida peninsula as you would expect from a Category 4 storm because the eye of the storm was so far off the coast. It was just a really big storm. But you didn't have 140-mile-an-hour winds impacting Pinellas or Hillsborough counties. This one, if it's a major hurricane and that eye goes across, you're talking about much more significant wind damage than what we saw, in addition to more significant storm surge. So having that debris out there will absolutely be a hazard when you're talking about this. So I would just, all the local folks, I know you've been working really hard. We appreciate it, but just do not take the foot off the gas on this debris mission. You have unprecedented amount of support to help you. Let's clear. Hopefully we can clear it all. I mean, I guess it just depends on where it's easy. If it's on a major road, like a kind of like you can go get it. Some of the stuff in the private communities can be a little trickier, but bottom line is there's assets available.
One more question, I swear. So the storm surge from Helene was like 20 feet when it hit the Big Bend, and they're saying we might see the same type of flooding if it hits Tampa Bay. So does that mean that Tampa Bay could see up to 20 feet of storm surge?
Yeah, I mean, so now they're saying 10, but here's what I would just say on that. From the entire time I've been governor, you look at different scenarios, and probably the scenario that was one that is challenging in terms of the damage would be a major hurricane going into Tampa Bay just because it's so vulnerable. The Big Bend, yes, we had certain communities that were hit very hard, and Kevin and I have been there and we're helping those out. But if you look at most of the Big Bend is uninhabited. When you're talking about Tampa Bay and you talk about what even 10 feet of storm surge would do in an area that has, I mean, the greater Tampa Bay area is millions of people, that is just a level of damage, I think, that would far exceed the damage that was done in the Big Bend. It doesn't mean the surge will be that high. That's not what's predicted yet, but I think the surge is predicted to be worse than it was for Helene. Now, I've also pointed out, because I think you got to be honest with people. I know there's some that want to just say it's definitely going to be as bad as possible, whatever. I mean, I give the range of possibilities because there's a lot of uncertainty here. And I mentioned it earlier, but it is true. Tampa Bay, if it's on the dirty side of the storm, will have more storm surge than if it's on the softer side of the storm. In other words, the further south of Tampa Bay the storm goes, it's likely to take water out of Tampa Bay. If it's hitting Tampa Bay or even a little bit north, there's going to be water cascading into Tampa Bay, and that's going to create, I think, the more extreme surge elements. But there's not projected for 20, but there is going to be projected for potential major impacts, and that's why I think people on the Barrier Islands, people in coastal Pinellas, on the Maine Peninsula, people in areas in Hillsborough, and not just on the bay. I mean, you have places in Hillsborough where there'd be major riverine flooding. So there's a lot of areas. That's why we want people to know your zone. Anticipate there being, from your counties, that there will be evacuation orders issued. Certainly, I think probably you may see some today, but I think you'll definitely start seeing them probably first thing tomorrow morning. But you don't need to have an order to do what you think you need to do to protect yourself. And so you have time today, you have time tomorrow, hopefully you have all day Tuesday, but certainly you have today and Monday to be able to prepare and to be able to take whatever actions that you deem appropriate. So we'll continue to provide updates. We're monitoring this. I mean, these models, what I would say on Helene's severity exceeded what most models had. Most models were not predicting a major. Most models were predicting Category 2 storm, some Category 3, and so kind of a weaker major, but very few were predicting a Category 4. And so Helene always went on kind of the upper range and even exceeded that. I'm not saying that's going to happen on this one, but as we look at these models, there are some models that were not accurate for Helene that say it's not even going to become a hurricane. Like, I just don't think we're not hanging our hat on that. We're especially if you don't have a good track record on this. So there's a lot of range of possibilities, but I think if you look at all the data out there, major hurricane is probably the most likely outcome, even though it's not 100%. So people do have time to make the preparations, execute your plan. We'll be back with more updates. This is a big effort. This is not a good track for the state of Florida. We've when you have them come in the Atlantic on the East Coast, a lot of times they can skirt. Even when they come underneath Florida and go up, there's always a possibility that maybe it goes a little wide to the left. Here, this thing's just coming across the Gulf of Mexico. Our state is just sticking out. We're going to get hit in some way, shape, or form. So people can just prepare for that. So we're looking at sometime on Wednesday for that, and we'll continue to update as we get more data in and the forecast changes if it does change. Thanks.